All right. Let's start off with anatomical position. By the way, if you look at your lab manual, the lab manual is only available through the bookstore. And yes, you do want one. Okay. So we are starting on page numero uno, and we're looking at anatomical positions. This whole science of anatomy, like many sciences, it started off with people from many different countries that spoke many different languages. It's not as if everyone who was studying anatomy that they all knew English. So there were people from Italy that were very involved, particularly in anatomy, France, Britain, Germany, Russia, people from all over that were writing papers about what they were discovering with anatomy and physiology. And one of the problems they ran up against was when we are publishing our scientific papers, or when I'm writing something and sending it to my friend Franz in Germany, how will he know that we are talking about the same thing? So one of the first things that they did was they came up with an agreement on which language they would use to name things and the terms that they would use in their writings. The language, by the way, that they decided on was Latin. Now, that was probably a little bit of an advantage for the Italians, but in general, Latin was already a dead language, so it really was not anyone's first language. And all of the educated people of the time were educated in the languages of Latin and Greek. So the terms that you will read when we start talking about, I don't know, like bones of the skull or something like that, those names are all based on Latin or Greek. And we'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to those words. But now we're talking about something called the anatomical position. Here was the problem. And the problem started out because of anatomists, but now this problem, this solution they came up with is a solution in medicine too. All of these terms here are terms that are used in medicine. Let's imagine I'm in the ER and someone has been involved in some kind of an explosion. And yes, they have a concussion and we're worried about internal bleeding. But in the meantime, you're the nurse and it's your job to figure out where are the little cuts that they have on their body, right? So you're going to say that there's a little cut like right here. Wait, there's going to be a little cut. I will put one right here, and one right here, and one is going to be right there. Okay? Now, you need to write that down. How do you do it? How do you write it down in words so that the doctor will understand it, so that everyone will understand what you mean? These terminologies are part of that medical answer to how you write those terms. Okay? Let's start out with the anatomical position. Before we could establish that something's above or below or on the front or on the back, we need to know how that person is positioned. For example, if I'm standing here like this, you can see that my palms are facing towards the back, okay? So then that makes this the front of my forearm, and that makes this the back of my forearm. But that's not the way they set things up. They set things up so that the anatomical position is just like this fellow right here, laser pointer. Oops. There we go. It's just like this guy right here, standing facing forward, arms down, out at the side with the palms facing forward. Okay. So at the very least, now we could agree that this is the front of the forearm. Why do we agree on that? Because we've agreed that that is his position. By the way, if he is laying down on a hospital bed, this part up here is still considered the top of his head, even though he's laying down. So this now becomes the top, right? All of these terms are as if someone is standing in front of you. That's called the anatomical position. So let's just start with the terms. By the way, they are on page 1, and I'd like you to notice that they are in pairs. So 1 and 2 are superior and inferior. They are a pair. Superior means the top of something or closer to the top, and inferior means the bottom of something or closer to the bottom. Here are 2 different ways that we could use that. Well, I don't have to stand up. Okay. I could say that my nose is superior to my mouth because my nose is above my mouth, right? I could also say that this was the superior aspect of my skull and this is the inferior aspect of my skull. Okay, so a couple of different ways, superior and inferior. They're a pair. The next pair we've got anterior, posterior. Anterior means the front of something or towards the front, and posterior means the back of something or towards the back. Anterior, posterior. So anterior, so this would be the anterior part of my skull, and this would be the posterior part of my skull, even if I'm laying down, right? Because we've decided we're naming everything based on the anatomical position, so it doesn't matter if I'm laying on my stomach or my back or whatever, because this is how we name things. You also could say that my belly button is anterior to my spine. Okay? Anterior, posterior. The next pair, medial and lateral. Medial means closer to the midline of the body from left to right, and lateral means closer to the sides of the body when we're talking left and right. So my shoulder is lateral to my sternum, or my sternum is medial compared to my shoulder. Okay, medial and lateral. Okay, let's see. Proximal and distal. Proximal, I think it's important for you to do this. Whenever you're coming to a quiz question, and we're talking about proximal and distal, for the word proximal, you can write right above the word proximal, closer to the torso than, for AP 120. The word proximal really means closer. But here in AP 120, we really just use it to describe arms and legs. When you get to 150, you use it for more things. And distal is farther from the torso than. So the knee compared to the ankle. Is the knee closer to the torso than the ankle, or is the knee farther from the torso than the ankle? Well, the knee is closer to the torso than the ankle, so the knee is proximal to the ankle. All right? The ankle is distal to the knee because the ankle is farther away from the torso than the knee. Okay, let's do this one. I'm going to pause for one and see if you get the video question right. Okay, you got it right. Okay, superficial and deep. Superficial and deep aren't on here, but I want you to think about who is that street magician, David someone. I don't know if I'm going to think of that. But anyway, he does this thing where he takes a big old needle and he jabs it into his hand. Well, as that needle is passing into his hand, it starts superficial and then it goes deeper and deeper until it goes past the middle and then it gets more and more superficial. Okay? Superficial and deep. All right. So let's do this thing. Let's describe my wounds that I had here. There's there and there and there. Okay? So this one, I could say that this one was on the anterior surface of the forearm, right? Anterior is the front part, anterior surface of the forearm. And it looks like from here it's about 5 inches long. And it starts about 4 inches proximal to the wrist. There you go. Now, everyone, German, Italian, Russian, everyone would understand what you wrote there. That's how we invented that. Okay, let's talk about body planes. First of all, take a moment and write this down. When we ask you, what is this plane, or what plane was this organ cut on, or what plane cut section, or what section is represented here, there are only 3 answers. And it's none of these, okay? Planes, cuts, sections, the only 3 answers are mid-sagittal, transverse, and frontal planes. Those are the 3 cuts. And I would like you to imagine you're in an episode of Kill Bill, and one of those people's got an enormous samurai sword, and they're about to cut me in half. There's 3 basic ways they could slice me in half. I'm sure they do all 3 ways in Kill Bill. Okay, so one is they could slice me right down so that there's a right piece and a left piece. That is called a mid-sagittal plane. It's also called a median plane, but in my quizzes, it'll be referred to as mid-sagittal. Okay? The other way they could slice me is right there across the center, so that there's a top piece that goes and a bottom piece. If there ends up being a top piece and a bottom piece, and by the way, it doesn't have to be exactly in the middle, but if there's a top piece and a bottom piece, it's called a horizontal plane or a transverse section, okay? And then the last one, they could slice me right down like this, right, okay? So that there's a front piece and a back piece, and if there's a front piece and a back piece, it's a frontal plane. It's also called a coronal plane. Or a frontal section. All right, so those are your planes of reference. Let's see. All right, let's go ahead and get the body cavities done on this video. The body cavities, the human body is built like a backpack. You may have received as a gift, one of those gifts worth purchase where you get like a really inexpensive backpack, and it's really just a big bag. Not that useful, right? So no one really likes those kind of backpacks. We like the kind of backpacks that have got different compartments, pockets on the inside, zippered compartments. The human body is like that. So if you open us up, we're not just one big splashing around place. We're organized into smaller areas. So the first way we're divided is there is a band of muscle here called the diaphragm that divides our chest cavity, which is known as the thoracic cavity, from the rest of the inside of your torso, which is called the abdominopelvic cavity. All right. So that's step number 1. Step number 1 is the top part, the part that's inside of your rib cage, thoracic cavity, and the bottom part, abdominopelvic cavity. By the way, abdominopelvic cavity, not the answer to any of my questions, all right? Because the abdominopelvic cavity is just divided up into 2 regions. The abdominal cavity where almost everything lives, and the pelvic cavity where there isn't very much, all right? So what's in the abdominal cavity? Well, it's everything south of your diaphragm. So everything that's not in your chest is going to either be in the abdominal cavity or the pelvic cavity. So your kidneys, your liver, your stomach, all of your intestinal tract, small intestine, large intestine, liver, pancreas, appendix. All of those things are in the abdominal cavity. Well, what's in the pelvic cavity? Not very much. So remember these. The urinary bladder is in the pelvic cavity, and the prostate gland in a man is in the pelvic cavity, and the vagina is in the pelvic cavity. That's enough. Okay? So lots of things in the abdominal cavity, not very much in the pelvic cavity. Now, let's go back up into what you might call your chest cavity, but not anymore, because in anatomy, you only get credit for the right answer if you've used the anatomical term. And the anatomical term is the thoracic cavity. The thoracic cavity is divided up into smaller compartments. Each one of your lungs, the right lung and the left lung, is in its own little compartment, its own little, I usually think of them kind of like hefty bags or Ziploc bags. And each lung is in a pleural cavity. Pleural cavity. Plural. The lungs, each lung is in a pleural cavity. Right lung in the right pleural cavity, left lung in the left pleural cavity. By the way, I didn't go over right and left, but this is my right hand. And if I'm standing in front of you, you're like, no, that's your left hand. Nuh-uh, it's my right hand. Because remember, anatomical terms, it's me, it's my right, it's my top when I'm standing in anatomical position, right? So the right lung would be your right side, the left lung would be your left side. Or when you're looking at an image like this, see how the right side is over here? Yeah, it's always going to be that way. So that's the pleural cavity. Let's see, what else have we got here? The heart is in a little hefty bag called the pericardial cavity. Pericardial. For those of you who know any Latin, peri means around, and cardi refers to the heart. So the pericardial cavity is the space around the heart. So that's where you'll find the pericardial cavity. Now, this is a tricky part, so don't get confused. The pericardial cavity sits between the lungs, and the area between the lungs has got its own name. The area between the lungs is called the mediastinum. And when we do lab this week, you will know that the esophagus is in the mediastinum, the aorta is in the mediastinum, the heart inside of the pericardial cavity is in the mediastinum, the esophagus is in the mediastinum. Lots of things are in the mediastinum. So the mediastinum is the space between the lungs. So let's imagine there's a quiz question, and I ask you, where will I find the heart? And you're like, Dr. Tydell, what should I put? Should I put pericardial cavity? Should I put mediastinum? Should I put thoracic cavity? What should I put? Well, you know it's not in the pleural cavity, because the only thing in a pleural cavity is a lung. But the truth is, the heart is in the pericardial cavity that sits in the mediastinum that is inside of the thoracic cavity. So generally, when it comes to anatomy, we just like you to put the most specific answer. So for the heart, you would want to find pericardial cavity. Okay? Those are our body cavities. Okay, next video.